Today I'm going to talk about some of the things that you need to consider when you want to upgrade your solar cluster. And I hope that you have been following a lot of talks which describe a great number of new features that are introduced as part of Solar 6, Solar 7. And you might be wondering, hey, I want to utilize all these latest and greatest features, but you already have a solar cluster which has been used for serving your critical business needs. And now you want to understand like what is the best way to get your existing cluster to be upgraded to the latest version without having significant downtime, which can cause a lot of business critical information. So a little bit of background about myself. I am a contributor to various Apache projects. Specifically, I contribute to Apache Solr, Apache Hadoop, and Apache Sentry project. And my day job is as a software engineer at Cloudera. So those who don't know about Cloudera, Cloudera basically provides a big data management platform, which is a combination of Apache Hadoop and Solr as well. And so my focus at my work is to make it easier for the users to use Solr, and so that you can provide like a reliable and fast search service. So today's agenda is basically as an overview of challenges that you will face when you do a solar upgrade, and what are the steps that you should be considering so as to solve some of these challenges. And we have built some sort of tooling to help you understand the backward incompatibilities that can happen because of the solar upgrade, and how that will help you to navigate all these changes. And finally, I will have a short demo of the upgrade tool that I have built. So now the question really is, look at the history of solar releases. So the slide actually points all the solar releases ever since Solr was contributed to Apache Software Foundation. And you will see a trend, at least in the initial days, the number of major versions were significantly lower. For example, from 2008 to 2011, the major version didn't change. Similarly, from 2012 to 2015, the major version didn't change. That means is that Solr was able to add number of features without really breaking the backwards compatibility. But last 3 years, like 2015, Solr 5 was released, 2016, Solr 6 was released, and hopefully this year we will also have a Solr 7 release, where not only Solr has added tons of great new features, but there are also a lot of functionality which has been deprecated and removed, which cause a backwards incompatibility, which makes it harder for the existing users to move to these newer versions. So one question, so there is always a tension between a system administrator or a business user who want to maintain the stability and the backward compatibility of the search service. And then there are always developers who want to actually get onto the latest and greatest features which are available in the newer versions of Solr. So there is always a tension between these two dimensions, and the main question that you should ask yourself is like, why are you upgrading, right? So I think of 3 major reasons why you should consider an upgrade. Like, for example, one major reason could be that there are number of bug fixes and new features in Solr which can improve the performance, reliability, and security. The other reason could be that your developers need newer ways to interact with Solr. For example, you want graph queries, or you want to use SQL on Solr. And as Anshum mentioned yesterday, like those of who attended his talk, he made a very good point where he said that, hey, you should take one relatively stable version and recent version of Solr, and you should not upgrade your Solr unless you need some features which are available in that release. But at the same time, you don't also want to fall too far behind, because if you are way behind the latest version of Solr, then your upgrade path will be more complicated. So one of the main reasons for doing an upgrade is, even though you don't need really all these features, but just to make your future upgrades simpler. So now that you have decided that you want to do a Solr upgrade, you should have a good game plan for figuring out what are the steps that you need to do. So the first step is always understanding the implications of your Solr upgrade, like what are the new features and bug fixes that are coming in which can affect your existing functionality, and would it cause any problems going forward. So one case could be that some of the changes require you to re-index your entire index, and you may not have original data available which was used to build your index. So in that case, doing an upgrade is probably not a good idea. So depending on your existing state and the backward incompatibilities which are there in the next version, you should decide whether you want to go with the Solr release or not, Solr upgrade or not. And even though Solr, you can do like a minor version upgrade. Here in this talk, I'm just going to focus on upgrading between major versions, because typically minor version upgrades are relatively straightforward and you shouldn't have too many of issues with that. Once you understood the implications of your upgrade, the second step would be to actually have a good rollback strategy in case your upgrade fails. So this is very important from business perspective, because you don't want your business users to be affected because of a failed Solr upgrade. And then I will describe what are the steps that you can take and what features are available in Solr, which will help you to ensure that you have a good rollback strategy available. Next thing, you need to have a mechanism to understand how to migrate your existing configuration and index data to this new version. So there are two different things. One is the configuration part of it, and one is the data part of it. And I will describe various options that you have for that as well. Next thing is to identify changes. If you are using any custom components, or if you are using SolarJ client, then you need to identify the changes which you need to work with the latest version of Solr. So that is typically straightforward, because you can just recompile your application or custom component using the latest version of libraries, and then the compiler will help you in figuring out what the changes are required. Last thing is there might be some changes required in the deployment model of a Solr server. So typically that is only applicable for Solr 4 to 5, because in Solr 4, you were able to set up Solr inside any web container like Tomcat or Jetty, but starting Solr 5, you have to use Jetty. There is no option of using a WAR file. So in that particular case, you have to actually understand your deployment model, and you might have to change that thing a little bit. So the next step for you is planning for a rollback. So essentially the idea is that you have to take a complete backup of your configuration and data. So for configuration, there are two different types of configurations, one at the global level, for example, solr.xml, and one at the collection level, which is specifically different for each and every collection. So you have to take a backup of both of these. And Solr provides you the command line tools, which allows you to download the information from Zookeeper, and you can store it in a reliable storage system. Regarding the Solr collection state, if you are already on Solr 6.x, then Solr provides backup and restore collection admin API, which in one API call, you can actually take a backup of your both configuration and your data. So this API requires you to have access to a shared file system. Shared file system could be an NFS mount, it could be HDFS, as well as cloud object stores like Amazon S3. But unfortunately, if you are not on Solr 6, then for Solr 4 and Solr 5 users, essentially the idea would be that you back up the collection configuration. So that means that you take a backup of your config set as well as your cluster state.json, because that way you can recreate the collection using exactly the same configuration that was created earlier. And then you want to rebuild your Solr index using the original data. Now, if you have used Solr for any length of time, this topic comes up again and again and again, in the sense that Solr is essentially a search engine. It's not like a data store. So it should not be used to store like a source of truth kind of a thing. And you always need to have your data available somewhere else. So it could be a database, it could be a file system, and that is very important if you don't want to lose that data. If your data is not important, if it is okay for you to lose that data, then it's not a requirement. But otherwise, you should have a backup copy of your data stored in a storage system. And once you have that data available, then after the upgrade, you can just do a reindexing and you can recover the state. So after the rollback strategy, the next point will be the data migration. So for data migration, again, there are two options. One option is just to do the reindexing using your original data. So the original data will not only allow you to do a rollback, but as well as rebuilding your index after an upgrade. So this is the most preferred mechanism that you should consider using, because then you don't have to worry about the index format incompatibility or stuff like that. But somehow you cannot do that, then the second option you have is something called Lucene Index Upgrader Tool. So this is a command line tool that is provided as part of Lucene distribution, and it essentially upgrades the Lucene index format. So there are two different things. One is the Lucene index format, which will be upgraded by this tool. But the second thing is, for example, text analyzers. And those analyzers also need to be backwards compatible, because the idea is that the analyzer implementation should be same for the one when you used for the indexing phase, and the same analyzer should be used during the query phase. So if you are indexed using version X of an analyzer, then during the query time, you need to use the same version, or at least the version which is compatible. But because of this Solr major version upgrade, if the analyzer have changed, then you don't really have an option other than reindexing your entire index. And the main challenge here is how to identify if any of these analyzers have changed, or do I really need to reindex my thing, or I can just do an index upgrade, is something most users think about, right? So we will get to this once we start thinking about the config migration. So when we talk about, again, as I mentioned, like there are two different configurations. One is like a global configuration, which is like solr.xml, cluster state.json, etc. So specifically for cluster state.json, Solr 4 used to have like a single file, which used to store the information about all the collections. And then I think in Solr 5, we changed that mechanism to be more scalable by splitting this thing per collection basis. So there is already a collection admin API which allows you to migrate cluster state.json. Similarly, for collection level configuration, they are typically Solr config.xml and schema.xml. So regardless of what configuration that you are talking about, these are the three main questions any Solr user will be concerned about, right? So one question would be that, hey, does my Solr configuration have any backwards incompatible changes? Now, this particular question is more or less tailored to your particular configuration, and so a release may have tons of backward incompatible changes, but it may be possible that the configuration that you are using may not have any incompatibility. So in that case, you don't really need to worry about that. Then for the second case, like if you have incompatibility, then what exact information do I need to fix this problem, right? What is the recommended approach which will allow me to overcome this challenge? And the third and the main important thing is, are there any changes in my configuration which will require me to do full reindexing, or I will be able to use an index upgrade tool? So let's see what is the state of art, right? How, like, Solr has been around for more than 10 years. I'm sure that users must have done upgrades before. So what is the recommended approach for today? So right now, the community basically recommends that you review your release notes and your configuration files, and that way you manually identify if you have any backward incompatible sections, and then using the release notes, you can try to figure out what is the correct way to fix those problems. Now, some users, what they do is like they take the latest configuration provided by the latest release or the release they want to upgrade, and then they merge their changes in that particular configuration. So that will allow them to basically ignore anything that they don't care about. So they get everything for free. And after that, they try to set up a test instance of Solr server and just provide that configuration and try to see if you get any error. So generally Solr helps by generating either warning or error messages during the initialization. So for example, if you have a field type which was removed from Solr, then during the core loading time, Solr will scan the schema.xml and then it will tell you that, hey, the field type that you are trying to use is not available, right? So you need to do something about it. So Solr is doing something, but it's not exactly, it's not giving you the entire piece of information that you need. Specifically, it doesn't tell you whether you can do an index upgrade or you have to do reindexing. So now one question that you might have is like, hey, what's the big deal, right? I can just go read the release notes and find out what those changes are. So let's see what the release stats look like. So I have basically figured out the release stats for last 3 releases, Solr 4, Solr 5, and Solr 6. So these are different sections that you will find in your release notes: upgrade instructions, new features, bug fixes, optimizations, and other changes. So one thing that I noticed during my work on upgrade is that the upgrade instructions don't actually cover the entire set of changes that you have to consider. And generally it is left up to the left up to the committer to decide whether to include that change in the upgrade instruction or not. So what that means is that you can't really be sure that just following the upgrade instructions would be sufficient. And here I would categorize, the way I categorize that there would be like 2 different types of users who will be using Solr. So one type of user is where you are setting up your own cluster and you are using the same cluster, right? So in that case, you know exactly which features that you are going to use, and that way you can narrow your focus only on those features. The second category of users where one team is kind of deploying a search platform and the other teams are kind of using it. Or it could be where a company like Cloudera comes in and provides Solr as part of their distribution. So the challenge here is that we don't really know which customers are using what. So that's why we cannot actually have our users to say that, okay, you just go ahead and read the release notes, because if they make any changes or if they don't follow certain things, then they will run into problems during the upgrade and it will basically increase the support cost for the organization. So one of the things that I have been working on is to essentially automate this process, right? So I built a simple tool using XSLT. Again, XSLT is just like an implementation choice, which could be changed. But in the core, what it does is that it scans your configuration file and it looks for certain section of your configuration which will not be compatible with the version that you want to go to, and it will provide you with enough information that will allow you to take necessary action. Again, this tool is quite customizable, so it provides all the it provides you all the rules which are required out of box with the default Solr configuration. But if you have added any customizations on top of that, you can actually add your own upgrade rules so that your users won't have any problems even with your custom changes. So this tool basically provides different types of information. One type of information is the severity of the complexity, severity of the incompatibility. So there are 3 different levels: info, warning, and error. So error means that if you go ahead and deploy your configuration, Solr server will not start, or basically it will have initialization failures during collection loading time, right? So in this case, most of these errors are due to the changes which require application specific knowledge. So I will give you sample rules that I have already written, which will describe what these things are, but these are the types of rules or these are the types of incompatibilities which require application specific knowledge for you to figure out. So the tool cannot figure out exactly what to do for you, and as a developer you need to do the right thing depending on your application use case. The second type of incompatibility is warning. So warning is generally meant for a deprecation. So here what the tool is saying is that the configuration that you have is going to work with this particular version of software, version of Solr, but going forward it will be removed. So the recommended approach should be followed just for the future migration path. And the last one is the info level. So info level, there are two different types of incompatibilities. The main category of these errors is that it won't actually result in failure of initialization. For example, one category could be where you have changes in Lucene which require you to re-index your collection, right? So in this case, if you go ahead and deploy the same configuration, yes, Solr will start fine, right? It won't throw any errors or exceptions like that. But when you try to query that data, you will not get the right results because there are some internal changes required which require you to re-index. Or some of the other incompatibilities are like, there could be incompatibility where the tool knows 100% what exact change is required. So in that case, we don't actually require application developers to do anything. The tool will automatically rewrite the configuration for you. So that's why we keep it at info level, like you don't have to worry about info, like most of these things, you don't have to worry about them. The second thing it does is that it gives you a description of the incompatibility, and this is very user-friendly description, not developer-friendly. The third thing, it will give you the recommended approach, how to fix this problem. If you are curious and if you want to know, hey, why this change was made, what was the rationale, like what was the discussion, we will provide you more information like Jira number and so on. So you can just go visit the Jira and find out all the discussion that happened for that particular change. That gives you more context, that gives you more information. And then it will also tell you whether you have to do re-indexing or you can just do an index upgrade. So let's see one, okay, so basically the tool works in two phases. Phase 1 is the validation phase and phase 2 is the upgrade phase. So during the validation phase, the tool just scans your configuration file and it will make sure that there are no error level incompatibilities available. So if there are any error level incompatibilities, then the validation phase will fail and you will have to fix those things manually yourself by reading all the description that is provided as part of the result. Once the validation phase succeeds, then the tool goes ahead and runs the upgrade phase, in which case it will just automatically do the transformations. And then you don't have to worry, you can take that configuration and use it after your Solr upgrade. So let's see how one of the rules that I have here is this incompatibility happened between Solr 4 and Solr 5, where if you are using spatial field types, then the units attribute was removed and it was replaced with, I think, distance units or something. So in that case, the tool will essentially tell you that, hey, this change was made as part of Solr 6797. You have to re-index the thing, and the recommendation I kind of skipped it because it was not fitting in the proper format. But the recommendation would be that you have to use the distance unit instead of the units attribute. So this is the error level change. That means that the tool doesn't know exactly how to proceed, and the user who is using this particular collection should know what type of information they want to store or what type of information they want to query. The second level of validation rule is where, so the way I mentioned, so this is the info level change where if you're using Bader-Moore's filter factory, then due to Lucene 6058, they changed the commons codec package. So due to the changes in the commons codec package, you won't be actually able to do the index upgrade and you will have to rebuild your entire collection. So this is the information that typically won't be possible, won't be provided by the Solr server during the initialization. And this tool actually gives you this information which is currently available only if you go through the entire release notes. And then it says that you have to re-index and the transformation is no, because there is nothing to transform in this case. So let's take another example of an upgrade rule. So for example, in this case, what happened, I think from Solr 4 to 5, if I'm correct, is that the default similarity factory was renamed as classic similarity factory. And what the rule it does is that it looks if you have a configuration which says a similarity element with the class attribute as default similarity factory, and it just rewrites it to use classic similarity factory. The default, if you are not defined a default similarity factory in your schema.xml, then there is nothing to be done because Solr will take care of changing the default automatically. This applies only if you have explicitly defined default similarity factory in your schema.xml. So this is the simple help of this command line tool. All it takes is that it requires type of the Solr configuration that you want to validate. So currently we support schema.xml, solr.config, and I'm kind of working on solr.xml. It allows you to do a dry run. So dry run will just run the validation phase. It won't do the actual upgrade thing. Then you can provide the path of the Solr configuration file, and you can provide the directory where the output of this tool should be stored. So I will do a quick demo. That way you will have more understanding of it, but this is just for information purpose. So what is the current status? So current status, I have hosted it as a standalone project in my GitHub repository, and I have filed Solr 11229 to get this tool incorporated in Solr. So if any committer is interested in getting this in Solr, I would be more than happy to help out. I have already implemented the upgrade rules which are listed in the upgrade section from Solr 4 to Solr 5 and from Solr 5 to Solr 6. On the to-do list, basically I'm still working on implementing the upgrade rules for Solr 6 to Solr 7. And one thing I mentioned before is that the upgrade section itself is not complete. There are many backward incompatible changes such as plugin deprecations and removals, which are not listed in that upgrade section, which should ideally be covered by this tool. So we need to identify a way to figure out all these deprecations so that the tool will provide more reliable results. So I have been working on doing some sort of static code analysis tools to kind of automate this task. But obviously this is like a Herculean task that is very difficult for an individual to perform. So I would really appreciate from the community if you are interested in using this tool, you can try to run it with your own configuration. If you find any issues, you can just write an upgrade rule for it. It shouldn't take that long. And please contribute back those rules so that the others in the community can also benefit. And the last thing that I also need to work on is basically handling the overlay configuration. So if you're using schema APIs, then those configurations are stored in JSON files. And I need to kind of merge the raw schema.xml and this JSON overlay configuration together before I run the upgrade tool. So this is something in progress, and I still need to work on that. So that's mostly from my side. So let me do a quick demo. We still have few minutes left. Is it visible? Okay, so what here I'm going to do is that I have a bad configuration of Solr 4 schema.xml, and I have a validator which I wrote for transforming it from Solr 4 to Solr 5. And I'm going to run this tool, and we will see what kind of result it gives. So it basically found that there are legacy field types, for example, int field, long field, double field. All these field types were removed from Solr 4 to Solr 5. And the tool detected all these removals. And it also noted that if you're using, it actually figured out that you're using this Bader-Morse filter factory. So then it is giving you a clear idea that you have to do rebuild your index, and you can't do index upgrade in this case. So let me just quickly show you how the schema validation results are. So this is just a very summarized information that we show on the screen, but there is a lot more detailed information which is available in the XML file. So some of the recommendations are still I need to fill out. Not everything is available. So for example, this is the information that I filled out. So for the spatial fields, instead of using the units attribute, you need to use the distance unit attribute. So this is the recommendation that you will get, and you will get all the other information that we already talked about. Yeah, thank you. That's it. Yeah.
Can it be possible to make your tool do a rolling upgrade from 6 to 7 or 5 to 6, if at all it is possible?
What do you mean by?
So without stopping the cluster, upgrade one by one, and so that there is no downtime for that cluster.
Yeah. So this tool is mostly about figuring out your config changes. So if you have backward incompatible changes, then you could just like swap out that collection using this tool. Like you can figure out what the next change should be, and you can just swap out, and then you can just reload your collection. That probably should work. Because we are not concerned about the rolling upgrade versus like complete downtime. This is more about understanding and getting the knowledge about what type of work that you will have to do to make sure that you have a reliable and fail-proof upgrade strategy.
Is there any sort of like what if you wanted to rebuild your index from scratch, but using a current Solr instance? Is there any like direct connection, like index from Solr 5 into Solr 6?
Mm-hmm.
Is there like a connection available for that?
Can you elaborate?
Okay, like you can index, like in CSV format or XML format, so on and so forth. And of course, if you search, Solr, you can get XML or CSV or JSON format. Can you just directly go from one previous Solr instance to another? Just index.
I think you can export it depends what your configuration is. For example, if you are using stored fields, then you have that raw data available inside your.
Once you fix the fields and everything, but then just use the raw data from the Solr index you have running to build a new one.
Yeah, but in that case, you will have to set up another cluster for that, right? Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, sure.
Do you have any experience or recommendations between doing, say, a 4 to 5, 5 to 6 versus jumping multiple major versions to 4 to 6 or 4 to 7?
I think as per my understanding, so are you talking about the config upgrade or the data upgrade?
Configuration.
Yeah, so for configuration, I can show you more about that. So the way it works is that you have to define your validation rules. And so far I have defined the rules at a by release level, like Solr 4 to 5, 5 to 6. But you can always combine them together if you don't want to run them multiple things. There is no real reason for you not to do that, but it just makes it more modular to have release by release rules. Yeah.
Do you also have abilities for minor version upgrades, like 10, 8, 12?
Yeah, so what was the question?
Do you also have abilities to do that?
Yeah, I mean, most of the times when you do a minor release upgrade, that's the whole like the concept of minor release is that it will be backwards compatible within the same thing.
Not always. We've had issues.
Right. So you can actually do that, right? So in that case, what we'll have to do is like we'll have to just go through the release notes for that particular release, figure out what changes are required, and if there are any such changes, then we just have to implement it as a rule, right? So there is nothing, the tool actually doesn't understand about any releases or anything, it just understands the rules. But what I feel is like at least at a starting point, it will be easier if we start with the major release upgrades, and then depending on the usability, we can start digging more deeper and deeper into it. So let me quickly show you, I think I have 5 more minutes. So basically this is the processor file that you will write. So it accepts input version of the Solr release, which is in this case Solr 4, and output version is Solr 5. And then it describes different types of configs that it actually handles, like schema.xml, Solr config.xml. And for each config type, there is a validator that is providing you the rules. So you can literally add any type of config types here. and the tool will just work fine. Now the validator portion is again very simple. Now some folks might question whether you want to use XSLT or not, but for me it's just like an implementation detail. If this tool is usable and like it makes sense, we can think about some other technology as well. But for me it was easier to just get it up and running, quickly writing something and making it to a point where it is useful to solve some of the real problems. Yeah, so all it does is that it just emits those XML files, which will provide you the backwards incompatibilities in your version.
So one quick comment. So if we were to bring this entire tool into the Solr code base, and let's say any developer who wanted to make a backwards incompatible change, either for the minor version or any major version, do you think it makes sense for the committers to also go ahead and write the rules for all of
Yeah. So the next, I didn't talk about it, but so if you look at the way currently it works is like during the initialization, we read the config file, and then there are like Java code that is written which looks for specific things, and then we add a log entry saying that, okay, this is warning, this is error, and so on. So instead what we can do is like, instead of doing that manual thing, we can just replace it with this tool, right? So then you don't have to do this duplication. You just write an upgrade rule as such, and Solr server will have the ability to, Solr server will know all these rules, and it will just use the XSLT framework to do this thing for you. And instead of throwing an error, it could just log an output to log file as well. So that way we can avoid the duplication of errors, like duplication of this information, and that way we get the upgrade rules for free, right? We don't have to do any extra work on that. But then the other thing we should think as a community is that how can we make it better for the users to understand what those changes are, right? Because I found during my own work is that the upgrade section is not complete. So probably we should think about a way by which we can say, hey, we can do X, Y, Z. I don't have any recommendation on that part, but as a community, we can come together and say that, hey, we can do X, Y, Z, which will make it easier for us to have a more reliable information from this tool. Because just having tool is not sufficient. It depends on how complete your rules are. So that, I think, there is something that we should consider as a community. All right. Sure.
So would you say it is a best practice to only do one major upgrade at a time, depending on maybe what the output is?
No, not really. So for example, if you are on Solr 4 and you want to do Solr 6, what you just need to do is like take your Solr 4 configuration, run this tool twice, one from Solr 4 to 5, 5 to 6. Once the tool certifies that it is okay for Solr 6, you can just go from Solr 4 to Solr 6 in one shot. So you don't have to worry about in between steps.
But you must upgrade that. You must reindex in that.
Or you can run the index upgrade tool twice. Yeah.
So would it be more, so if you can reindex, is that always the best thing to do?
Yes, that's the general recommendation strategy, but not in all cases users will have access to the original data. Yes, you had a question. Yeah, so that's the general strategy. Like yesterday, if you followed yesterday's presentation, the main point there was that you want to take a stable but relatively latest release and make sure that you don't fall too far behind the latest and greatest, right? So that way, that will make your upgrade path simpler going forward. Yeah, I think we are just on time.